Okay, we're going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Present are council members Floyd, Frazier, Cost, Bub, and Marmee. First item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $9,714.
Good evening. This is for Dale Queen's payout. He has left city employment, and this is what remains to be accomplished for him to clear the books.
I have a motion by Floyd, second by Cost. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $175.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This was one of the cases where a defendant had cut his scram strap, which was a $175 cost. He has reimbursed us for that, so now we want to appropriate the money.
Motion. Motion by Frazier, second by Bub. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Next item is a request for appropriation in the amount of $3,284.
This appropriation is for our JAG grant for our property room upgrades.
Motion. Second. Motion by Cost, second by Frazier. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And you're up here for another one? For an appropriation amount of $17,644.54.
This appropriation request is for the JAG LE. Both this grant and the previous one are from the state of Ohio. This project will involve the purchase of 6 mobile radios for the police department.
Second. I have a motion by Floyd, second by Frazier. Any questions or discussion on this grant? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And with that, this committee stands adjourned. Next up, I believe, is service.
All right, we'll call the Service Committee meeting in order. First up, those present are myself, Rath, Cost, Bub, Frazier, and Floyd. First up, discuss Resolution 17-05, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service of the City of Newark, Ohio, to enter into a contract without competitive bidding for the rebuild and reinstallation of one screening units at the City Newark wastewater treatment plant. Is that a formal name or is that a typo?
Sounds like a typo to me. So I'll speak in place of Roger Loomis tonight, and I think he sent you the background and the purpose, possibly, but basically this is to replace the bar screens at the wastewater treatment plant. They were last constructed in 2000 and 16 years old now, and have been damaged and need to be replaced. Reconstructed, probably more than anything. And the Parks and Corporation was the original manufacturer of the equipment, and they're the sole source provider for any parts and service for those. So would like to waive the bidding and contract with them directly in order to get the screens reconstructed. I guess if you've got any other detailed questions, Darren from the wastewater treatment plant's here. He'd be glad to answer any questions also. So.
Okay. Anybody on the committee have any questions?
Make a motion.
Motion by Floyd. Seconded by Cost. Any questions from the audience?
That's a question.
A second ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Time is passed.
Can I ask you a question about the filter system?
Sure.
So in reading through the documents, it said that we kind of did some upgrades in 2000, and this is in order to clean up the filter system. Is this the only filter system that we have there that does this, or is there a duplicate?
There are two. I'm sorry. Before you answer that question, if you would come up to the podium so we can get that on the recording. And I apologize, I did not catch your name.
Darren Wise.
Thank you.
He got an award.
Yeah, there are two of them, and this is just one that needs rebuilt. It got damaged. These normally need rebuilt every 10 to 15 years, and this one's 6 years along the way, and it got damaged and stretched, and we tried to repair it, but it keeps re-breaking itself, so we've got to replace the whole thing.
And is the other one in good shape? And
Yeah, it's in good shape.
how long do you think the other one will last for?
I'm hoping it'll last another 10 years, unless something comes in and,
Breaks that?
yeah.
All right.
Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Darren. Up next is ordinance 17-03, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Safety for the City of Newark, Ohio, to release the liens previously placed on the properties located at and known as 244, 247, and 249 Lawrence Street, Newark, Ohio, and all other property maintenance liens placed on properties owned by Darrell Ellis prior to December 22nd, 2014. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. This is what I understood to be a previously agreed upon deal just to facilitate the sale. If I understood correctly, you were already aware that this was probably going to happen, and this is just formalizing the forgiveness of the liens to facilitate the sale of the properties.
Okay.
Motion.
Motion by Buck.
Second.
Seconded by Frazier. On the spot. Any questions from anybody on the committee, Mr. Frazier?
I think I'm okay.
Any questions from anybody in the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign.
Thank you.
That passes 5-0. Thank you, sir. Up next, consider ordinance 17-04, amending Article 6, General Regulations, Article 7, non-conforming uses, buildings, structures, lots, Article 86, accessory structures, Article 88, fences, walls, and similar structures, Article 15, public and private swimming pools of the zoning code of the City of Newark, Ohio. Mr. Moorhead.
Yes, sir. If you remember, I was before you back in November with some proposed changes to the zoning code. Basically, just tune-ups to several items that we've been dealing with over the last 6 or 7 years. We created the ordinance here before you with 5 of those sections. We do not have changes to the sign portion of the ordinance. We've got some more work to do on that, and we'll bring the signs to you all together. There were several changes in the sign portion of the ordinance that we were talking about, so we'll bundle that up and bring that to you at another time. But these are the 5 different sections that we felt we needed to move forward with and get these resolved and dealt with. And honestly, these seem to be pretty easy items to deal with here. So If there's any questions as to the particulars in those, I'll be glad to try to answer them, or if you want me to go through them, I can go through also. But
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Fuller.
In Article 115, where it's talking about private pools,
Yes.
and it says temporary pools such as inflatable metal frame pools installed and removed seasonally are exempt from the zoning ordinance.
yes.
I just remember at one point there was a pool in my ward that was fairly high and didn't have any kind of fence around it or anything. I mean, is that exempt now? I mean, that's because I was called by somebody who was concerned a kid could get up in there and, fall in and drown and,
Right. What we're targeting here are those short kind of blow-up pools you can buy at Walmart on the weekend. They're hard to meet any setback requirements
Okay.
because they can just be moved all over the lot pretty easily.
Okay.
And basically, they're calling anything greater than a depth of 24 inches is a pool, but we have not been enforcing any fencing or ladder requirements or anything on those short, sort of temporary pools.
When you say short sort of temporary pools, are you talking about those 24 inches in depth or less?
That's what the inflatable pools are. Yes. The temporary pools.
Okay. So
So if someone has a hard-sided pool,
a metal frame pool.
a metal frame pool,
That's 4 feet deep.
4
3 or
foot,
4 feet deep.
4 foot deep, yes. That's a structure that you're not going to take it down in the fall and put it back up in the springtime. Regulations would be in effect for that. So those require the fencing, the ladders, all those sort of things.
Mr. Cost?
Would there be any diameter limits on, I know what you're talking about, it's a kiddie pool. I mean, would there be any limit to that whatsoever? Or
We've seen them in all sizes,
I know they're not very deep.
Yeah. We really took this verbiage from a couple of other community zoning codes and felt that, it was probably appropriate for what we're doing also, because those things, they can pop up overnight, and it's really hard to track those in the first place. And then they go back down. So having fencing requirements and the ladder requirements and the lockout requirements and so forth is impossible to get compliance with. But I thought of that. Should we have some sort of diameter requirement?
What about like little fish ponds and that kind of thing people have in their backyards with fountains?
We don't enforce those as a pool.
I think I'd be more apt to like to see a depth requirement as opposed to a diameter requirement. And I think 2 foot is ample personally, but Mr. Barney?
Yeah, the majority of those pools are more than 2 foot.
Majority of
Those pools, those temporary pools are over 2 foot deep. They're 3 foot. Some of them are even 4 foot, but they're usually not greater than about 10 foot diameter, because the sides can't support that kind of water. So, I mean, because, and not only that, there's probably pools that'll be manufactured this year that we don't even know the dimensions yet.
That's the issue. That's the problem.
yeah.
So,
All right. Any other questions from the committee?
I have one. In 6.15,
Yes.
What was that previous language? Is there something that you're trying to solve for with that?
There was no previous language in that one. That is a new section, actually. It's a question we've had come up several times.
Which is researching previous easements and who's responsible for it? Is that what the question is?
The responsibility for finding out what easements on your property are the property owners. It's not for us, for the zoning department, to do a title search on your property. So if you've got a gas line easement and you put a shed over top of it, and the gas company comes in and has to replace that line, that's the property owner's responsibility to know that that's there. And if we grant you a permit for a shed, it's on you to know that there's you're putting a shed over top of a gas line, and to know what the requirements are of that easement.
So the liability of who's responsible.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by
Second.
Floyd. Seconded by Bob. No other questions? All in favor of passing this on to full council, signify by saying yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Or aye. Opposed, same sign. And that'll move forward 5-0.
Thank you.
And that concludes the service committee. Thank you all.
Up next is safety. All right, we'll call the safety committee to order. Present are Floyd, Frazier, Johnson, Rath, and Blake. We're here to discuss Ordinance 1702, adopting and codifying a vacant property registration code for the city of Newark, Ohio, and authorizing the Director of Public Safety to administer the provisions thereof. Just to give some background information, prior to my election in my first coming into office in 2016, I met with the administration and the previous safety director, and this item came up. What do we do about vacant properties? How do we get a handle on it? How do we identify it? And how do we make progress in occupancy rates and removing blight within our community? One of the items that is frequently used in other communities is a vacant property registration. Discussing with some of the members of the administration, as well as looking for the best use cases, this legislation came about. And so the one thing that we want to prevent is people that are doing work, renting, living, maintaining their properties. And so what we're looking at is vacant, unoccupied properties where people are not performing work, where people are not having rentals, where people are just kind of letting it sit and rot. And so, working with the law director, who is very receptive of this, we came up with this legislation. And we tried to protect as many of those parties as possible, and also hold people accountable for those properties as well. So, I imagine a member of the administration would like to speak. Is there any comments by members of council or any questions up to this point?
Could we ask the safety director to speak to this, please?
Good evening. Mr. Frazier and I talked about this more than once. Part of the reason that I'm in this position is because I'm pretty much a straight up guy, so I'm just going to tell you, at this time I'm not necessarily in favor of this. I don't hate it. It has too many unanswered questions for me. I don't know who's going to pay for it, who's going to implement it, who's going to enforce it, who's going to manage it, who's going to track it. I know the ultimate answer to that question is me, but I don't necessarily know how we're going to do it. What I will also say is, while we talk about this, and I think this is absolutely worthy of continuing discussion, is that this is like discipline. The idea behind discipline is to change the behavior. I don't think the idea behind vacant property registration should be to generate revenue, and that's what this does. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm uncomfortable with that specifically because we've lost 2 levies for capital improvements money, and I'm afraid this is going to be viewed as a tax. Now, can we argue and make a legitimate argument that it's not? Yes. But as Director Sasson and I just discussed, public opinion doesn't necessarily listen to that. They're going to see it as a tax. And that's what I'm afraid of. So it will also not necessarily be equally applied. We don't know every property in town that's going to fall under these guidelines. And if I don't know them all, I need to go out and find them, because I can't just use it on ones that come up that day. If Joe Paul is out taking care of business and he finds one of these structures and applies this to it, then I won't say that I've singled this person out, but I should really be enforcing this across the board. To do that, I'm going to need somebody to do that. And there's not money for someone to do that right now. So, concept, not necessarily against the concept. The problems with implementation, right now I just, and we discussed this openly and honestly, that I just couldn't commit to it. And my experience at 24 years at the police department tells me, if I don't think it's a really, really good idea, I probably ought to wait. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm not willing to commit to this at this time. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
Both of them have to do with man hours. I would imagine that there's going to be initial man hours that would need to be expended to basically take an inventory of the stock within the city of Newark to see what is vacant.
And you're right. Now can I answer that question first?
Well, let me give you the
All right.
follow-up question, and then you can answer them either way you want. Once we have an inventory in stock, or an inventory of what is vacant, obviously that's going to be an ever-revolving inventory. What do you think the man-hour requirements would be once that initial inventory is taken to maintain the program?
I don't know. And the initial thought that I had on how to find these properties is that I would go to various real estate companies and I would say, I need a list of all of your properties that have been listed with you, residential for 6 months, commercial for 12 months. That gives me my list. Now I need to know which ones are occupied and which ones aren't, if you have that information. That would be the quickest and easiest way for me to find those properties. Now, that's going to make realtors go the other way when they see me coming. I also think that their client base could have issue with me asking for that information. Although it may very well be public information, and you could have that.
And if I understand right, any building is considered to be occupied if it has furniture within a building.
Well, I couldn't speak to that right now without looking at it or asking the law director's opinion. But what I would say is, to enforce this equally across the board, that is how I would do that. Now, if we're going to use this to pinpoint certain properties, it's another tool in the toolbox, but there are plenty of tools in that toolbox now. We have more work than we can meet with 2 people. Could I use 3 or 4 people? Absolutely. There's not money for 3 or 4 people. They're already leaning properties. I'm working on efficiencies within that mechanism to have those liens applied more often than once a year. But that will require the cooperation of county agencies. So I have a meeting set up to talk about that. So hopefully we can meet some efficiencies there and do a little better job in getting those applied. But what happens is, if Jeremy owes liens, sells the property to you, before those liens are applied, the liens get applied to you, and they don't apply to Jeremy.
That's kind of off topic, right?
But it's a problem. It's a problem. But to get back on topic, then fine. How many man hours? I don't know.
And my struggle is law director, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't spell out exactly how the administration is supposed to roll this out and what their procedures are. This is more of just the guidelines and the guiding principles of what is a vacant or unoccupied structure, how is the system of payment and fee structure is set up. And as far as going out and going to lenders or real estate agents and saying whether they have vacant properties or what is not in this legislation at all, right?
I think that's exactly the safety director's point. It's not in there. It simply says the director of public safety shall do these things. Now, go figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the safety director's point.
Yeah, and I think my struggle is we're based on a complaint-driven model as is for property maintenance. And when we go out there and we identify that, hey, not only is this property in violation of the property maintenance code, but it's also vacant, that would be the scenario in which to implement this legislation. We don't need to do an exhaustive inventory with our resources going out in every part of the city to identify vacant properties. I think the point of this legislation is to enable properties that are identified in the everyday work as being vacant and building documentation on top of that to assist with safety service and property maintenance continuation activities. Do you not see any value in that being used?
I think what you just said should be followed by a question mark, not a period, because it says vacant properties shall be registered. If you're not registered, you're in violation. In the past, we have administered the property maintenance code because of, in many reasons, because of staffing issues as a complaint-driven model, but that's an administrative choice based on limited resources. How you enforce a mandate that a vacant property be registered is a decision that the administration would have to make anew with regard to this. And you get to the age-old question of, if we can't enforce it, why would we pass it? So it's a circular argument. It's, I think, exactly the point the safety director was making, that there are questions from an implementation standpoint that he doesn't necessarily have the answer to. I can give you the legal answers to your questions, but that doesn't have anything to do with the practical application of the ordinance. So I think everything you said should have been followed by a question mark, not a period.
I think it was meant as a question. Do you see that as being added value, safety director, of implementing in that perspective?
I don't like to put any law in the books that I don't know that I can enforce or enforce equally across the board. I think that they are doing well with what they have. This is going to be, at this time, would be a distraction for the three of us, essentially, myself, Mr. Carter, and Mr. Paul, because we would have to come up with an implementation or an enforcement model, and at this time, I'm just not convinced.
Mr. Rath and Mr. Johnson.
Excuse me. In regards to safety forces, meaning the police department and the fire department, do you see it as being useful information or benefit to those two departments to have a database? Again, a two-part question. To have a database of vacant properties within the city, and then two, should this be implemented and we have that database, do you see a way of being able to easily and have that information readily at the hands of those in the police department and fire department?
When our business contact list prior to transferring dispatch to the county was maintained by our dispatchers, and we did have an on-call list for businesses, and officers through their daily interactions would collect that information. Information is always valuable. I'll never tell you that information is not valuable, because it absolutely is. The question would be who's going to collect that information and in what model it's going to be kept and disseminated. I can't answer those questions either, but I can tell you that it's a lot of man hours to do them, to go back to your previous question. But information is always valuable, absolutely.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, presently, we do know that we have vacant properties around. How do we deal with long-standing vacant properties that go into disrepair and
the current process is Mr. Paul and Mr. Carter address the specific issues that they find, the specific violations that they find. They put fines on places. If they're not paid, they attach liens to the property. Eventually, we acquire the property in one of several different ways. They'll sell it to somebody else who will either provide that property to the city, or they will make repairs, but they have to do essentially one or the other, or the process starts all over again with them. But it's time consuming. Would this be another step in that process? Yes. If it's a vacant property, they could add this fine on it too, but now you're just adding fines on top of fines. There's already fines. I don't believe that this will necessarily make the transfer of property go any faster. Will you have a contact person? Possibly, if they register it. Can you still find that information? Yes, I believe you can still find that information. I'm going to go back to my answer to Mr. Rath. Information is always good. The question is, who's going to put it in? How are you going to pay that person to put it in? What software are you going to use, and how much does it? It always comes down to money and or time.
I just want to say that as I read this the other day, I had the initial idea, well, could be a good idea, because I live in a neighborhood where there are vacant properties frequently, and they are abandoned, and even the house next door to me, which is a double rental, was vacant for several months last year. But as I read through it, I compared it very distinctly to the rental registration thing that we had several years ago, and we went round and round and round with that. And while I believe in the concept of rental registration, it was the same deal, because it was going to be gone through the safety department just like this is. You have to have a database. Somebody has to set it up. You have to have forms for people to fill out. You have to have somebody to do all the tracking of everything. And as Mr. Rath said, it's going to be a constantly changing thing, because one thing that's vacant now may not be 2 weeks from now, but someplace else might be, for a period of time. And I just see it as something that would require probably at least one more person in your department. And I just know how strapped we are for money, given the state auditor's report the other day, and how much work somebody would have to do. And I know George and Joe Paul are just, they do over 2,000 places a year, and that keeps them very, very busy. And so I have the same concerns that the safety director does with this.
And to your response, Ms. Floyd, all respect to the legislation, if you're going to give me money, give it to me for a policeman or a fireman.
I guess my struggle is, when do we tackle vacant properties? When do we have a plan in place? What is that time frame?
We will have to, and the answer is I don't know, but we will have to address it when Licking County's population hits 200,000, because then rental registration becomes mandatory, as far as I'm informed.
So 40 years from now, maybe.
I don't know.
It's a pretty arbitrary number.
I think it's.
Let's look at population growth.
I think it's, like I said, it's a conversation worth having, but we don't have the money to implement it right now.
I personally like the concept, and I think we need to do something. However, again, it comes back to the same problem. We don't have the money. and the citizens said they didn't want us to have the money. So therefore, as much as I would support this, if we had the money, I will not support it based on this.
And I think my struggle as well is there is reimbursement associated with this program. 60% dedicated to the administration of this program, 40% toward desperately needed capital improvements of police, fire, and service. That's often called on in order for mitigating fires, mitigating crime, mitigating for maintenance. And so we do have a mechanism to cost recover the additional person that's associated with that. And I have no problem removing the initial registration fee so it does not look like a tax, because I feel the benefit that we get out of this is much more than the $150 that we get from somebody registering it. And I think the access to information is something that we lack. When the U.S. Census tells us that 9% of our residential properties are vacant in the city, and we have no source of record to either dispute that or confirm it, we're dealing with a lack of information. And so, in order for us not to have a plan, in order for us to say, hey, this is too complex for us to solve, just continues the problem down the road. And so, if this isn't the legislation that we decide on, please bring forth legislation that we can enact. But I'm tired of having these problems that we don't solve, and I'm tired of having legislation brought forward that we can't agree on. And so please work with me on this, but I guess the struggle is if this isn't the solution and this isn't the right time, what is the solution and what is the right time?
I'm happy to discuss that with my people and talk to you at any time over this.
Mr. Marmee.
Just off the top of my head, as far as a possible solution to your concern and also the safety director's concern, is first and foremost, we need to get some folks involved in the conversation. I would say the lending institutions, because foreclosures become an issue and what will happen there. And honestly, I feel that the main concern is more with commercial property than it is residential. I believe that, I don't know if registration requirement should be something, or if it's something along the lines of giving the property maintenance code some additional leverage on an additional issue, such as a vacant commercial property for more than 12 months, and we tag it the first time. They have multiple, and it just adds a little bit to their procedures, because honestly, half the time with them, they notify the owner of an issue, a property maintenance issue, and they make one little correction, and then we have to start all over again. Where if it's a vacant property, we may not have to. So maybe it's not a separate legislation as much as we can add it to the property maintenance code, something about vacant properties. We could look at it in that capacity, and maybe not as a registration purpose, but more as this is the issue we're trying to overcome, is these vacant properties for an extended period of time, because then it does become a safety issue or a property maintenance issue. So, but it all stems around that vacancy. And I say vacancy more than unoccupied, because as I have made you aware that by definition snowbirds fall under this definition, and we don't ever want that, because some properties are unoccupied for 6 months residential, and it's just because the owners are down in Florida for 6 months or out in Arizona, and we don't want to do that to our residents either.
Unless they take us with them.
Pardon?
Unless they take us with them.
Yeah.
I'd be all right with that.
So, I mean, as far as a possible workaround, can we ask Joe and your folks, if we added something into our actual property maintenance code, what would that be?
Absolutely.
And work with them instead of having a separate legislation and registration process.
Yeah, I think that my frustrations, you see vacant properties turn into dilapidated properties, turn into red X properties, and then somebody has to pick up the tab to demolish them. And so the impact to neighborhoods and the impact to our community is visible. And I think that this should be a priority on the administration in order for us to get legislation to help you do your job and also to help improve our community. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I think you assume that if we fine people, they'll either fix it or pay the fine. Understand they do neither many times.
Right.
So then what? And if it's you fine them more, okay, well, they didn't pay the first time, well, they're going to pay the second time. So hence you see the liens in this room that go on these properties from property maintenance. And the people that will pay probably are your most compliant, or the ones that maybe forgot or slipped something, or who knows. Those that don't want to will just dig in. Now, if you want to go to Columbus, a big city with a lot of resources and millions of more dollars than we have, they have, prosecutor's office that has a whole team just for property maintenance. So they push it all the way through. They got the judges on board to prosecute people. We don't have that, and we'll never have it. I'm just going to be honest. You can only work with the tools you have. I'm not saying we can't work it better, but as the safety director says, when there's law in the books, it's our job to enforce it, and our job to try to collect if someone hadn't paid. We ran into this in the tax office. Roger down at the water office, if you don't pay, we shut off your water. Great incentive to go pay your water bill. You don't pay your taxes, what do you do? Well, get somebody to pay their taxes. And if they really want to dig in, no one's going to throw them in jail when they don't pay their taxes. So it gets very frustrating, but yet that office still has to send out delinquent payment reminders, which is an enormous amount of money, knowing none of it's going to be collected back in. And those are the frustrations the administration has. When we could, instead of somebody sitting here and sending out 100 letters today, postage, labor hours, that know you're not going to get anything back, you could be out doing other things that are more effective. So those are just some real life day-to-day logistics of what happens in here. When people dig in and don't want to pay, what's the next recourse?
And two scenarios to counteract that is, I have a vacant property. I know I'm not going to do anything with it. I registered in order to make the police and fire department and people aware that if there is an emergency, here's who you contact and here's my insurance information in case you have any questions. So responsible landowners with vacant properties. And I mean, the other struggle that I have, the greatest benefit of this is the information at hand. With people that do register it, we're able to leverage that information in order to protect first responders, in order to help property maintenance so they know what they're walking out to before they go to it. And I think that's something that's often overmissed as well. And I have no problem removing all fees associated with this to get the information. But the point of the legislation is, yes, it costs people. That's why there's a fee structure built in. And yes, you should be penalized if you don't follow the rules. And that's why the fine structure is set in.
But they have to pay.
They do.
To get those fees.
Same with property maintenance fines that we already
We constantly overproject revenues on anything we ever do and underestimate expenses. And then what we find in a few years, we can't do this anymore, but it's still on the books. And that's where the problems get in many fold. And many communities have done this. They've gone all through this and they find out they're not collecting any monies because they're basing them on how much do you think you'd collect out of all those fines? You'd be lucky to collect 50% of them.
I was going for 20%.
Well, and that won't even pay the staff to do the work. A $34,000 employee cost us $60,000 with benefits. It just doesn't work. The numbers don't work, and that's the frustrating thing we had with rental registration, as Carol talked about a little bit. Some of this came to surface. We had some discussions. Again, all good points and further discussion on ways, but how do you do more with less financial or manpower or labor force, things like that? And how there's some things we just can't do when you don't have the money.
I think there's merit to what Mr. Marmee said about tweaking existing ordinances rather than putting this on the books, because what I'm afraid also will follow, as she alluded to, was rental registration will be hot on the heels of this if we start making property registration.
Yeah.
So I would much rather explore this.
Well, I want to be sure we stay focused on what our goal is. If our goal is to have these places occupied, could you pick a single goal? Now, if it's to have a good database, fine. We have Lindsay Brighton up there that works 40 hours a week just to maintain the database that we use internally for all our underground utilities and everything. This would be every bit of that. I mean, it takes a person.
I think it's multiple goals. I mean,
Sure.
one of it for sure is to improve neighborhoods and get people occupying those structures and prevent fire, crime, and accidents occurring to children.
Right.
I think the second fold is understanding what the information is at hand for first responders, so when they go in, they understand that, hey, this is a vacant property, this is who owns it, and they're empowered with that information. I think the third fold is when we're doing development activities, we understand what's going on in those neighborhoods, what is there, and what are the opportunities in those neighborhoods for improvements.
Sure.
Mr. Costa.
I could be wrong, but as many times as Joe and George are called out to the same properties over and over and over again, I bet you they could pretty well tell you 80% of the abandoned properties that, as it is. I'm sure they could, they already have
That institutional
the
knowledge.
answer to what properties were abandoned and what ones aren't, because they deal with it constantly over and over and over again. So to me, the information's already there.
Ms. Floyd.
I was just going to say, I talked to Joe Paul the other day about this issue, and one of the things he said is that some of these abandoned properties that we have are being acquired by the county land bank, and that ultimately some of these will then be torn down through the land bank, and that will take care of them. I mean, it'll be an empty lot at that point, but, you know.
I mean, I think we're targeting for 50 properties throughout Lincoln County for the land bank next year. And I think there's 1,900 registered with the U.S. Census as being vacant currently. And so
I'm not going to speak for safety, and probably Assistant Chief Simmons would say they're not going to approach a house because something says vacant that they assume it's vacant. I'm going to say they're going to probably assume someone's in there. Now, that could be a vagrant, that could be a homeless, that could be a kid, that could be a... So they're not going to go by some database that could be outdated and fight that fire, approach that fire any different. They're going to assume somebody's in there until they've done a complete check. And I think the police would assume the same, considering there's somebody in there, God forbid, a gun or some kind of weapon.
And to put you on the spot, if you have an idea that a property isn't maintained or is vacant, does that operate different procedures with the stability of the structure at all? Where, hey, maybe you take a second glance to see how stable it is and before you send people in?
It does. It starts you out on a different mindset. But again, your primary mission is life safety.
Yeah.
And even if somebody comes out of a house that was occupied, and we need to make double sure that everybody's out.
Yeah.
Even if they say, but they're in a panic mode. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. So we don't take that lightly, and we would approach that with a different mindset, but we wouldn't rule out that somebody's
With
not.
the same goal in mind. I take it there's not a motion. So with that, we will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Up next, capital improvements.
Members present, Frazier, Paul.
Hey, Dave, I tried to call you back.
Graff, 11, and Johnson.
Okay. I got the boys going over sweet church.
We are discussing Resolution 1704, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to enter into contracts subject to appropriation of funds for the refurbishment and rehabilitation of fire apparatus and waiving competitive bidding. Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, really what this legislation is an intent to inform the committee that we have a fire truck. It's a 2004 that needs to be refurbished. We think if we refurbish it, we can probably get 4 or 5 years more life out of it. If you remember last year, we got a new fire truck. Well, this one would not be new by any means, but it would be refurbished and it would extend the life. What we're asking to do is give me permission to put it out there and waive the competitive bidding. There's only so many companies that really do this work, and this is the company that's been selected by the chief and Mr. Simmons, who's here tonight, to answer any questions that you have. Should the committee approve this, I'll be back at the Finance Committee because I'd like to borrow the money and do it over a 3-year payback. The cost is about $91,000, but the first step was to get this committee's approval to waive the bidding.
Yeah, I'm just curious why for a $91,000 bill we're borrowing it, not finding it.
Well,
capital improvements budget.
We could pay for it directly out of capital improvements and not borrow it if that would be the committee's choice. But I would have to take away from some paving dollars to do that. I could do that. I mean, there's money there. I could pay the full amount if that would be the finance committee's choice. We could do that.
Assistant Chief, is this engine 3? Is that what's being refurbished?
Correct.
What's the replacement strategy while that's out? Are we taking a reserve engine from 4? How do we have coverage?
We have a reserve engine available that we did some maintenance to. It was the old Rescue that was replaced by the new Rescue we got last year. So we sunk some money into it to make sure it's going to be a reliable reserve, and that's what they'd be using while it's gone, because it will be gone for anywhere from 4 to 5 months.
And this is the West Main fire station that it would be switching out of?
That's correct.
Motion by Roletta, seconded by Kraft. Any further discussion?
I understand this is an old vehicle, and maybe we have some trade-in life in it. Is it worth putting this much money in that age vehicle compared to maybe over a 10-year life, leasing a new one?
Well, here's the position we're in. We have 2 vehicles, both Engine 3 out west and Ladder 2 on Hollander Street, that are approaching middle to late age. We're not going to there's no way we can replace both of those at the same time. Ladder 2 is much more expensive because it's an aerial apparatus along with an engine. It's got a pump on it as well. So to buy us some time and get another 3 to 5 years plus, through discussions with Director Rhodes, we decided this would probably be a good idea. Because we're looking at anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000, depending on $400,000 for an engine, $800,000 plus or minus for a ladder. We need some time to come up with a strategy to replace one of those. So a $90,000 investment, although it is nothing small, is a fraction of what we're going to be faced with in about 5 years with both Engine 3 and Ladder 2 in dire straits.
I'm sorry, the new one now would be $400,000 or right thereabouts.
Correct.
Yeah, and Don, that was the area what we paid for the one we got last year. And if you can remember, we chose to finance that 7 years, whereas in the past they were financed 10 years.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is just get to the point where we've got 5 or 6 payments made on the new one before we branch out to get to another one. And we see this as just a little bit of a bridge to help us accomplish that goal.
No, I understand that. It's tough putting that much money in a vehicle that old, even though, because who knows what else is going to go on.
Right, but this is a pretty comprehensive overhaul. This is not just polishing up the paint. Yeah, and it's in 2 pieces, and I'll recap it real quickly. The first piece is sending it to a diesel shop, and they're going to actually take the engine completely out of the vehicle, along with the transmission, and overhaul them both, as they do with over-the-road trucks every so often, to get significantly more miles out of them, and to reduce maintenance costs. The second portion of this, we're going to send it to a shop that's the only shop in Ohio that deals with that manufacturer's model, and we're going to go through the pump, which is the primary firefighting piece, and a lot of auxiliary stuff like safety equipment, lighting, brakes. So it's going to have quite a thorough once-over by the time we get it back.
How long does this extend the life of the engine for? What is the expected?
I would say minimum 3 years, most likely 5 to 6.
And how much of life is left in it now? Would you say a day or 2, or what is it?
No, actually it's been, the reason we're putting money into this vehicle in particular is it's been a very reliable vehicle. Its maintenance costs have been relatively low compared to some of the other ones. It hasn't had a major malfunction, as like the tower truck did, the big ladder downtown. We're surprised with a $21,000 engine overhaul because all of a sudden the engine blew. We don't want that to happen. We're trying to minimize our surprises, maximize our longevity, and we're putting about 7,000 miles a year on that particular vehicle. So you figure it's got 104,000 now. 5 years would have an additional 35,000, be 139, 140, which if we did nothing would be in dire straits because things would start to break unexpectedly.
Any other questions? If not, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation. Vehicles,
$262,111. Before Barbara gets started, I wanted to say that we met with Barbara. When I say we, Buster Prince and I did, and we asked her if she could go out and find some grant dollars for city snowplows. And she found us 50% grant dollars, and I just would like to thank her for that.
You're welcome. This request, we're getting ready to, Buster and I, to meet with Randy Comisford of ODOT. The EPA grant, our application ranked 5th out of those selected in reducing emissions. So we'll be improving our environment by getting rid of these 2 dumps that we have and pollution, and we applied for everything we could through this EPA grant. This was our first shot at it, and we decided to go for the 50% because, as Dave said, we need 2 trucks. So the additional funding we'll be getting, if you look on your appropriation, the EPA grant's $116,056. We were not able to include the plow attachments, so the city needs to pay for those. But this is a great grant, and if we have an opportunity this year to apply for additional vehicles for the street department, we're going to try again. So that's our request, is to get the money appropriated so we can move as fast as we're able to.
Mr. Frazier?
Does the $262,000 include the plow apparatus and everything?
Yes, it includes everything.
Okay. And that's just kind of why the differentiation between the 116 and the 146 was the
Correct. And you won't see them on the road for this snow season, but they should be ready for the 2018 season.
I'll make a motion.
Second by Frazier, second by Rath.
Questions in the audience?
Can you get one of these for a fire truck?
We'll try. But not through the EPA grant. We have to try for another grant for the fire trucks. They're very specific on what you can apply for.
Mr. Rath?
Are there any grants available for brine apparatus?
For, pardon me?
Brine?
Not that I'm aware of. See, with the EPA, their focus is emissions, clean environment, improving the environment. But, you know.
If you use a smaller vehicle and place out brine to melt the snow and the ice and didn't have to plow it, that would certainly reduce emissions.
Well, you know, that's a thought. You might want
to use a larger vehicle.
Well, you might want to get with Buster and see what his plans are for this year, because if we apply in 2017, you know, I don't know what type of vehicles he's got in mind. So you might want to get with Buster on that.
We have one brine truck.
We need about 3 more, and we need 2 or 3 brine stations to replace the brine in the trucks as they're using it.
We need money.
I've been trying, I've talked about this for 7 years.
I just want to say great job finding this grant.
You're welcome. Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Is there anything else from the audience? Well, let us vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? 5-0. And that concludes our business.
Thank you.
Nice job.